It is such a treat to be here. It's my second trip to Elon. I was here back in 2009 with my first book. So thank you so much, Deandra and Peter and Shannon and everyone who brought me here today. So we are going to talk about gender and decision making. And I have two goals here, a short-term goal and a long-term goal. The short-term goal is that when you leave here this afternoon, you won't just think differently about gender and decision making, you will actually talk differently about gender and decision making. And the reason we all need to talk differently about gender and decision making, because the way we talk now limits both men and women. And that's going to be one of my main themes tonight. You're going to see that. That's my short-term goal. Have you think and talk differently about gender and decision making. My long-term goal, my big vision, like my purpose in life right now, is to change the larger conversation about gender and decision making, because I want women's decisions to be taken just as seriously as men's decisions. Because right now there's this push, right? We're having this national conversation about gender, which is so exciting. We are telling women to take their proper seats at the table, but we've got to think about how their decisions will be treated once they get there. We're also encouraging lots of young girls to go into science and engineering, which is fabulous, but how will their decisions be treated once they get there? We want to make sure that their decisions are treated with just as much respect as men's. So we are going to have some fun talking about the research and what people believe about gender and decision making. And the core question that everything we're going to talk about comes back to is the decision making experience different for men and women? So if you have one takeaway, that would be the question I hope that you feel you can answer. But before we get into gender, which I am eager to talk about, I first want to ground this in your own life and decisions you face, because I think that you'll be able to take away more if you're thinking about your own decisions as we go tonight. And at the very end, I'll offer you some strategies about decision making. So we all face lots of decisions. Maybe you're not deciding between those two, right? But there's the daily pressure to make little decisions, like Netflix, which show to watch. And I think they give you, 10 seconds, right? And then there are big decisions about which turn to take next in your life. And we're going to talk about some strategies, particularly for the latter one tonight. But I want you to take a minute. The reason I want you to take the Post-it notes is I want you to think about 3 decisions you hope to make. And let's think about 3 decisions you hope to make in the next 3 months. What I want you to do is I want you to jot down, and I'm not collecting these are just for you, so whatever words will be helpful for you. Write down on one Post-it note each a different decision you hope to make in the next few months. Is that clear? One decision, one per Post-it note. Does anybody need a pen? Do you want to pass that down? Does anybody else need a pen? Okay. You want one, sir? There you go. Oh, no worries. Anybody need any more time? Okay, I'll give you another second or two here. And what I want you to do with those is I want you to sort them. Put the one at the top that's most important to you. It doesn't matter if it would be important to anyone else, just important to you. Put that at the top and then put the other 2 down below it. And now I want you to take about 2 minutes talking with the person next to you about those decisions. Whatever you want to discuss, why that top decision in particular might be important to you is a good place to start. Go. Do you want to chat with someone up there? I want to make sure we got a couple of opportunities for you to chat with somebody, so I want to give you the opportunity. I'm sure you Matthew, if you come over. Do you guys partnered up already? Okay, great, good. So let's come back together. Is anyone willing to share a decision? Don't share someone else's decision, okay? Is anyone willing to share a decision that you're hoping to make in the next few months? Anyone willing to share? Yes, in the back, please. Decisions about grad school. Okay, nice, thank you. Whether to go or not go, or where to go? All of the above. Nice, yep. I know that place. Yeah, Timothy. Wow, so between 20 different choices on which camp to go to. Summer camp, you said? Nice. Wow, that's planning ahead. Can I hear any others, please? Yes, over here. Where I want to work after graduation. Where you want to work after graduation? Are you a senior or sophomore? Okay, great. All right, good. Any others? Can I get one more? Yes, over here, please.
I'm planning my wedding, so
Oh. Yeah, big decisions. I mean, you've already made the big decision. No, right? Yeah, right. Good. All right. Fabulous. Yes. So, and I'm sure if we kept going, we would hear many. And when I've done this, sometimes I've heard some really difficult decisions about people who are about to graduate and they're trying to decide if they're going to move back to a country that they came from, where there's a lot of hostility and fighting, and do they want to move back to a war-torn country? And then there are also people who are like, yeah, I'm trying to decide if I go home for Thanksgiving, right? I mean, there's a whole range that you might be facing. So I'm hoping to give you some strategies that will help you, particularly by the end of the talk. We'll see if we can help you. But I also think that some of the things we'll be talking about might help you see some of the pressures you are feeling around some of your decisions. All right. Now, my book, How Women Decide, each chapter looks at a different stereotype about gender and decision making. And those are the 5. There's a chapter looking at stereotypes we have about women in confidence, one about stress and emotion, right? The notion that women tend to be more emotional decision makers and men tend to be more stoic and non-emotional. We're going to talk about 2 of these tonight. And I need to put out at least 2 caveats, qualifications. First of all, gender isn't binary. Gender is a continuum, but I am going to talk about it the way the research, for the most part, talks about it, which is male and female, at least in terms of decision-making research. Decision-making researchers are kind of behind the times. Like, they often don't even talk about race in terms of demographics. So, yeah, I will largely use the terms male and female tonight, but I know I'm oversimplifying. Also, every average comes from a distribution. So when I talk about averages for men and women, if we even think about height, right? On average, women are shorter than men, but it doesn't look like this, right? It's not the case that all women are shorter than all men, right? The averages, the distributions overlap, right? There's some women who are taller than average men and taller than maybe the tallest man you know, and vice versa. There's men who are shorter than the average woman. So when we talk, the reason I bring this up is when we talk about decision making, your roommate may be the exception. You may be an exception. I just want you to know I'll be talking about in broad generalizations based on what the research has to say, but there are certainly distributions here. Does that make sense? Okay, good. All right, so another activity before now we're gonna start getting into the gender research, and I find, as someone who loves to teach, it really helps you get into the research if you have to predict what the research is about to tell you. So before I give you these findings, I want you to try to guess what this survey is going to say. So it's like survey says. So the Pew Research Center did a study in 2015 looking at how Americans viewed 7 leadership qualities. So those 7 are on your handout. Does anybody need a copy of the handouts? Everybody got one? Okay, great. So those 7 are right there. They're listed. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to predict what they found in terms of how people thought of these as gendered qualities. So the question they asked is, who possesses these qualities? And do men or women possess these? Or is this quality more characteristic of men or women, or equally characteristic of both? Does that make sense? So if you thought, for instance, the first one on that list is ambitious. If you thought that American people think of men and women as equally ambitious, you put ambitious right in the middle of that continuum. You might think that people think women are more ambitious or men are more ambitious, in which case you put it at a different place on that continuum. But that's what I want you to do. I want you to take those 7 qualities and guess. This study was done in the data was collected in 2014, published in 2015, so it's pretty recent. What would you guess most Americans say? So take a few minutes, feel free. If you're someone who likes to talk this over with someone, feel free to do that. So were there any that you thought were easy to place on the continuum? Were there any that you thought were easy? That you think Americans might, in general, think of men or women? Do we have any thoughts? Do we have a hand? Wait, over here. Oh, yes, thank you so much. Yes. Yes, that is one that the data is going to support. I'll show you. I have all the data all at once, so I'll show you that in a minute. Yes, so that women are more compassionate. And that was the one that was the strongest typed for women, that compassionate was seen as that's a very feminine quality. So absolutely right. Were there any others that you thought just immediately jumped out to you? In the very back row, please, in black. Oh, women is organized. Interesting. Yes, that was also, it wasn't as strong as compassionate. There were plenty of people who thought men and women were equally organized, but that was also down on the feminine continuum. Any that you thought might be down on the continuum for men? Yes? Ambitious? Yes? And over here? Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say that, or decisive.
Or decisive, yes. All right, so here are the answers. So what's nice to see is that intelligent and innovative were both listed as Americans thought those were equally true of men and women. You've got compassionate was the furthest in terms of being having a strong gender stereotype. And that decisive was considered the strongest associated with men, but it wasn't considered as strong as compassion was for women, if that makes sense. You can look at the Pew Research data to see the more specifics on this. And it's not surprising that ambitious is down on the men's end of the scale, right? All of the book Lean In is really about women needing to be more ambitious, really, is one way to sum up what that book is about. All right, so those are the findings in terms of what people think is true of Americans. Now, I'm not going to get into data of what is and isn't true. We're going to get into a little bit of what is and isn't true on the decisive, because that's the one I care most about, is the decision making. Now, what do people think leaders need to have? So of those qualities, what are people looking for in their leaders?
What we think they should be, or what they actually
What people think the leaders should be, right? So rather than giving you a lot of time to think through this, I'm just going to show you the results. So this is listed from top to bottom. So this is before this presidential election, which is interesting. So in terms of the quality that's most essential for a leader to have, 84% of the 2,000 people in this sample said that honesty was most important. So 84%. Coming in a close second, there was a tie for intelligent and decisive. 80% of the people in this survey said that leaders need to be intelligent and decisive. And then you can see it kind of falls off from there. Compassionate, which is considered a highly feminine trait, is further down the list, although it's really interesting. Teams will often say, we want people to care about one another, but a leader, wow, decisive is more important, right? So this is interesting. I want to unpack that issue of decisiveness is where I want to go. So, like I said, 5 different, were there any surprises there? Any surprises either there or on the continuum? Yes, sir.
They're surprised that innovative would be down so much.
Ah.
Needs to be doing something forward-thinking, something different,
Something,
progressive.
yes, you would think that, right. And interestingly enough, at least it was not considered nearly as important as, for instance, honest, intelligent over innovative, right? Anything else that surprises you, either that list or on that continuum from earlier? Yes? Yes, isn't that interesting? But particularly given that when you think that lean in is really pushing that what women need is more ambition. So it's a masculine trait, but it's not necessarily valued as much. But decisiveness is, and that's also a masculine trait. At least people think it's a masculine trait, which is what I want to address. Any others that were surprises? I saw a hand up over here. No?
I think that was, yeah, I was just going to say ambitious.
Ambitious as well. Okay, good. All right. So let's look at decisiveness. We're going to focus on that one first. I interviewed women from my book in a wide variety of different roles, and I'm going to tell you about a woman we're going to call Diana. I can't, most of the women that I interviewed, I can't give you their real names and where they exactly work, but I can, I think it helps to have an image of people and a name, so she liked the name Diana. We're going to call her Diana. So Diana is a police chief. If you think women have it bad in tech, you need to look at law enforcement because there is less than 1% of police chiefs are women. So in this room, this would be a room of all men except for 1 woman. Maybe 2 women. If these were police chiefs sitting in this room. They're very underrepresented. You might be thinking, well, what about police officers? Are there more women police officers? And there are, but it's not like this. Most TV shows represent the proportion of male to female officers. So this is Reno 911. It's like 4 men to 3 women. In reality, it's about 7 or 8 men to every 1 female police officer, which means female police officers often have to work with a male partner. They often don't get partnered with women despite how it's represented on TV shows. So I was interviewing Diana. Let's go back to Diana. I was interviewing Diana about men and women in the line of duty, and did she find that men and women had approached decision-making the same way, or do male and female officers approach it differently? And here was her, first she was just like, yeah, it was almost as though she was reading from a book. They're trained exactly the same way. Of course, they make the exact same decisions in every situation. So we kept talking about it. And she said, well, okay, let me tell you about a common complaint that I get from my male officers that I don't hear from my female officers. She said, so let's say that you have a male and a female officer, because they usually work in teams. They arrive on the scene, and there are 2 men who are screaming at one another, yelling, and about to get violent. This is, in the city she lives in, this is a common enough situation that police officers face. She said, so they're about to get violent, and the police officers are going to try to stop whatever's about to happen. She said, if the male officer is the first one to speak, he's likely to say, and he's trained to do this, hey, what's going on here? And she said, and he's likely to get very close to the situation and as though he's physically taking control of it. She said, a female officer, on the other hand, is likely to ask the same question, but she's also likely to preempt it with some other questions, like, hey, did you happen to see what was happening? Do you know what's going on? What's happening here? And she said that the female officer will often take her time in asking these questions. The complaint that she gets is from male officers that she's stalling, that by asking these questions and by staying a little bit further from the interaction, because the male officer is usually more physically right there, because a female officer is stepping back, she's being indecisive. They don't tend to use that word. They say that she's stalling, that she's taking too long. And Diana explained, she's like, you know what's happening in that situation? She's trying to figure out, if I need to take one of these guys down, will I be able to? Which way are they going to run? She said she's trying to analyze the situation. But the male officer will complain to the police chief that she's being too nice. She's taking too long to make her decision, and she's also being too friendly. She's not getting control of the situation. Now, that's interesting when we think about that compassionate and decisiveness, right? This fits the model of women being more compassionate, less decisive. So it's always interesting when you change computers. You're like, oh, that's not the formatting I use. That's okay. So the common belief is that Women take care, men take charge. There's been a study of 300 executives, and this was the way they summed up the leadership styles of men and women. And this kind of captures what Diana's talking about, right? That women take care, but men take charge. And there is this common view that women are indecisive, that women are taking longer to make decisions than men do. Almost every summer, I guess it's a slow part of the news cycle, there will be a study. You can try searching for the most recent one. There's almost always a study of some major retailer looking at how long it takes women to pick out their clothes. This was the last one that I saw. What's interesting about these studies, when I go back and look at them, they never report how long it takes men to pick out their clothes. They just report. So it's very interesting that there's a bias even in either the method or at least in the reporting. If anyone wants a research study to do, I would love for someone to look at red box selection, right? You have red box here, right? Where people get movies. I would love for someone to watch how long it takes men and women to make decisions at Redbox, because I think this is very gendered, even if there is a difference. This might have to do more with the pressures that women have around clothing. Men can put on a suit and they're done, right? But in any case, this is a very common stereotype that women can't make up their minds. What does the research actually say, right? We're trying to figure out are these gender stereotypes true? The research on women and men as decision makers shows that there are, for the most part, men and women take just as long to make decisions, and they struggle just as much with hard decisions. So men and women, equally decisive or equally indecisive, depending on how you want to describe it. There are two groups where women show a harder time making decisions, but they're unusual groups. One group are teenage girls. Teenage girls tend to have a harder time making decisions than teenage boys. And the current speculation on that is that because there are so many mixed messages of what it takes to be a good woman, making decisions about what do I want to do for school, what do I want to be when I grow up, that there's so many mixed messages where it's much clearer about what a good man should do, that might be one of the reasons it's harder for young girls to make decisions. It tends to go away by their 20s. The other group that where you see women being much less decisive than men is people with obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't know the theorizing on that, but women with OCD have a harder time making decisions than men with OCD. But these are not the groups that we would pick necessarily as our leaders, right? Certainly not teenage girls, and there might be some executives with OCD, but this does not describe people in general. So one thing that I want you to take away from this, when we think about decisiveness, women tend to be just as decisive as men. The research shows that. But we tend to draw on these stereotypes, and we tend to interpret when a woman is making a decision and taking longer than you might expect, she's often interpreted as being, she's being indecisive or she's being compassionate when what we need is action. Decisiveness. Let's turn to another stereotype. Any questions? I'm going to leave time for questions at the end, but I want to give you an opportunity. Do you have questions about decisiveness before we move on to another stereotype? Good? Okay. Let's talk about risk-taking. So with decisiveness, you might have been thinking, well, there's that phrase, it's a woman's prerogative to change her mind. Have you heard that? Some, yeah? Maybe not as much. Maybe the older generation has heard it. So I think some people are not surprised to hear that women are viewed as less decisive than men. This one about risk-taking, though, I think is a little bit, this may be something that you haven't thought about before. More people find this a bit surprising. So, risk-taking. There are lots of gender stereotypes about risk-taking. Now I want to tell you another story about one of the women that I interviewed. She gave me permission to use her real name because she's told her story other times. This is Vivian Ming. First I want to tell you what Vivian Ming was like as a college student, then I'll tell you what she's like now. So when Vivian was in college, in her early 20s, she wanted to make a movie. She knew nothing about the movie industry, but she and a friend had found a short story that they wanted to adapt into a movie. So they decided, and then they were in Southern California, they're people who make movies. They started looking for funders, they were shopping it around, and within a couple of months, they had enough money to make a movie, at least to start the process. Now so they went to investors, they did the pitch, they said, we'll put your name in the credits. Evidently that's sexy enough to get money. Now here's what's interesting. Vivian was not studying film. She knew nothing about the movie industry. In fact, she hadn't even declared a major. She took her like 7 or 8 years to kind of, at this point, she was midway through college and wasn't even sure what her major was going to be. So she was, and the best, she had been a manager of an abalone farm. That was the most impressive thing on her resume. So she knew nothing about the movie industry, and yet, within a couple of months, less than 6, she had all the money she needed to raise to start this film. Now, great for her, right? Fast forward ahead 20 years. She's now in her 40s. Here's what's interesting. Vivian found what she did well, and that was math. She is a math genius, and she discovered this. She ended up taking a math course in college, discovered she liked it, got a PhD in neuroscience. She has joint appointments at Stanford and Berkeley. She has started 5 different companies. But she left the movie thing, by the way. She decided not to make the movie, and she's glad she didn't. She went on to, like I said, she started 5 different companies, all tech companies, each one more successful than the one before. She's been named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 10 women to watch in tech. She's a consultant on technology and education for the White House. She has a list of credentials most of us would love to achieve any point in our career, let alone to have achieved by 40, okay? But when Vivian sits down with an investor now, because she needs investors to put money into her technology companies, she discovers something she didn't see in her 20s. Now people hesitate. Now she experienced resistance. Even though she can show them demos of the tech, even though she can talk about her appointments at Stanford and Berkeley, and all of these incredible things that she's done, she said it was easier to get people to write checks for her movies in her 20s than it is now for her to get people to write checks for her tech. Now, does this make any sense? Now, a couple of reasons. Could be her age. Everybody loves, and you take this for the younger people in the room, everybody loves to invest in a young person who has an exciting idea, right? So it could be her age. It could be that it's more expensive to invest in technology than it is to make a movie, at least the kind of movie she wanted to make. And it could also just be the time period, right? In the 90s when she was trying to make this money, the economy was booming. So those could all be 3 reasons. I have a different hypothesis. I think it's because Vivian's a woman. And when she presented, Vivian is transgender. When she presented these ideas in her 20s, she presented them as Evan. She was her father's oldest son, and people saw them sitting across the table from a young man who was very ambitious. And I think that's one of the reasons that people were willing to invest in her. Now, you might be thinking, no, wait a second, maybe people are hesitating now because she's transgender and they're uncomfortable, they sense something's different. That could be. But Vivian believes and insists that most people don't know this about her. Now, what I think is happening there is people think of risk-taking as a thing you do with men. I believe that risk-taking is very gendered. We like to take risks on men. We're not as comfortable taking risks on women. And we think that men should be the real risk takers in our society. And that's why they were more comfortable backing Evan, even though he was completely inexperienced, than they are backing Vivian, who can prove to you again and again how incredibly competent she is. So let's unpack this idea of risk-taking as something for men and not for women. And this is important for the men and the women in the room because I think men are pushed into risk-taking and I think women are discouraged from it. So, what do I mean by risk-taking? It means passing up the sure thing, right? It means like, well, if you're gonna buy a car, you could go buy it at a lot and test drive it and be sure that you like it, you get it pre-inspection, or you could buy one online, right? Buying one online might be cheaper, right? But that's risky compared to the more expensive car that you get to test drive yourself. Does that make sense? You're passing up the sure thing for something risky, but there's some possible benefit of doing the risky thing. It's exciting to watch a risk taker, right? I mean, maybe you're also like, oh, what's gonna happen? But we like to watch like someone out there taking risks. The mouse is fine, by the way. But the idea is that yes, it's risky, but there's a big reward there. We associate risk with high reward. If you're willing to take the risks, you're likely to get the goodies. And our language is really revealing about this, right? We have lots of phrases in our language that associate men with risk-taking, that say if you're gonna be a man, you gotta get out there and do it. You know, man up, be man enough, grow a pair. Pretty sure that's not breasts. And in contrast, when you think about our language with women and risk-taking, there's not many phrases, but they don't suggest you got to ante up. In fact, imagine if you can, a 15-year-old boy who's out with his male friends, and they want to do something risky, and one of the 15-year-old boy says, guys, I'm not sure this is a good idea. I'm not sure this is safe. Okay, first of all, it's hard to even imagine that. But if he did say that, what would he be called? It would probably be some kind of female name, right? Yep, he'd be called a sissy, a mama's boy, and there's lots, and it gets worse from there, right? But the idea is it's masculine to take risk, it's feminine to fear them, to move away from them. A fabulous study was done, it was just published this year in the Journal of Pediatric Psychology. And what the researchers did a clever study where they went to families that had just visited the ER. And the reason they went to the ER is they had a child who was injured, not fatal, but these were basically like bicycle accidents, falling off of something. Bad enough to go to the ER, not bad enough to be mortally wounded. And what they were studying is, what did the parents say to the kids? What they found, this is the number I want you to remember, is 4. Parents were 4 times more likely to tell their daughters, you need to be careful in the future, than they were to tell their sons. So imagine that. It's bad enough that you have to make a trip to the ER, and you're telling your daughters, not your sons, to be more careful. And I've talked with some ER workers, and they say, oh yeah, they're like, to sons, a lot of parents are like, you're gonna have a scar, as though this is a badge of honor, right? But for their little girls, they're like, honey, you're gonna have a scar, you gotta be more careful. So it's very interesting, encouraging risk-taking, or at least not discouraging it for boys, whereas discouraging risk-taking for girls. So, do men take more risks, right? There's this belief that men should be the risk takers. We urge men to take more risks. We discourage women. So, the answer is, in some contexts, yes. Can you guess where men take more risks? Thoughts? Yes? In the workplace. Good. We're going to start with that one. Others? Yes? In the classroom? Oh, interesting. Yes. Okay, good. Others? Yes? DUIs, yes. Yeah, there's probably more of those. Yep, good. Yes, over here in the green. Physically more, and that might tie in with the DUI, right? Okay, good. Any others? Any other guesses? All right. Oh, yes, do you have? No, okay. All right. So, men take a lot more risks in their hobbies. They tend to do, some people call them health-seeking risks. They're actually like the opposite of health-seeking, right? DUIs, addictive behaviors, gambling tend to do more. But in terms of hobbies, men tend to be more involved in things like skydiving, extreme sports. What's interesting is there have been studies that looked at the same men who do these risk-taking sports, and then they've studied their professional lives. And here's what's interesting, is that in professional settings, so you take the same guy, you bring him into the office, and you look at him in his job that he's good at, and men and women take the same number of risks at work. Now, not in terms of negotiating salaries, right? But where they tend to take the same risks is this a contract we should sign or not? Should we put a bid on this particular project? Is this a good proposal? Men and women take the same risks there. And that makes a lot of sense. If you're going to be good at your job, right, you have to know which risks are worth taking, right? So actually, even though the expectation is men take more risks at work, they don't in terms of when they're evaluating and trying to judge, should we pursue this or not? There's some question about whether or not men take more risks around negotiation, but even there's recent research that just came out earlier this month showing that men and women are just as likely to ask for promotions. I'll have to get the citation for you if you're interested. The classroom, someone mentioned the classroom. So this is interesting. There's been a variety of studies looking at when men and women participate in class. We're going to talk about this more in the workshop tomorrow, but there's research showing that there's kind of a tipping point. When there's about 67% women in the room, women begin to participate equally to men. But there has to be that percentage. So at 50-50, men still participate more. At 60-40, men still participate more, which I think is the percentage of women to men here, right, at Elon, yes? So at 60-40, men still participate more than they are represented in the room. It takes almost to 70% before women begin participating. So if we think of that as risk-taking, yes, men are doing that more. There's a whole bunch of things, though, around participation, right, and voice that goes beyond risk-taking. So yes, men do tend to take more risks, but in professional settings, they don't. In terms of work, to be good at your work, you've got to be able to judge whether a risk is worth taking, and men and women do that equally well. So you might have come in wondering, like, okay, is there something about men or women making better decisions, right? We've been talking about stereotypes. So let's take a look at better or worse decisions. What the research shows on this, so there's a lot of debate if just looking at individuals, whether men or women, is there some gender difference in decision making as individuals? But where there's a lot of clarity is when you put people in groups, right? So when you put people in groups, here's what you find. You find that you get better decisions from mixed gender groups than you do from single-sex groups. So you get better decisions if you have men and women making the decision together and both having input than if you have single-sex groups. So, data. So first of all, if you've got some money that you were just handed and you're trying to decide what to do with it, you want to put it in the stock market, put it in a company that has a female founder. Companies with at least one female founder, sometimes a company has two founders, so it could be a male and a female. But if a company has at least one female founder, depending on the industry, that company outperforms the stock market by 13 to 63%. Now, the reason I'm saying that's a mixed gender team is that most then executive boards are not all women. They're talking one female founder, and then you have a bunch of VPs that are going to be male. So these are considered mixed gender groups. Whereas if you have a male founder, it could be all men. Does that make sense? Great. Peace treaties. This is one of my favorite of the statistics. So the UN Security Council commissioned a study looking back at peace treaty negotiations. And what they found was typically men are the only people sitting at the table when a peace treaty is negotiated. That may or may not be surprising to you. But in those peace treaties where there was a woman at the table, that peace treaty was 35% more likely to last over a decade than those that were negotiated by all men. So when women are involved in a peace treaty, it lasts longer. More people are taken into account, and the needs are addressed for a longer period of time. And then for this room, scientific citations. This is a recent study that was done that found that when you have men and women on the scientific team, so that you have the co-authors that are both men and women, there's 34% more citations for studies that have mixed gender team than all male or all female research teams. So they're doing better science, or at least doing better writing. Maybe they're not doing better science, but their ideas are worth citing. So in all of these different fields, you're finding that mixed gender teams are doing a better job. So I promised to end with some strategies. I did this at the very beginning when I started giving these talks because I didn't want to end on a depressing note. I've since now added that those decision statistics. But I really want you to leave here with some help to help you with your decisions. So the first two strategies are about the gender component. Keep an eye out for people using gendered stereotype language. Things like women's intuition, right? That might sound empowering, but it suggests that women don't know how they're making their decisions, right? Like, I don't know, that's my intuition. No, actually, we need to change some of this language. A woman's prerogative to change her mind. When you hear people talking in gendered ways about decision making, speak up. Strategy 2, support girls and women in taking risks. I would love to see this be something that we change. And we also want to give our young boys and our men the opportunity to not feel pressured to take risks. There's both sides of that. Now, 2 strategies specific to your own decisions. A major factor in decision making is trying to predict what you're going to regret, right? I'm sure that with the grad school decision, like, am I going to regret moving to Pittsburgh, or whatever it might be that you're trying, or am I going to regret if I don't take a year off, right? So we try to predict our regrets. Here's what the research shows again and again. People think they're going to regret their actions. And that's why I like this erasing. People think that they're going to wish that they could erase the thing that they did. And that's true in the short term. So for instance, you may have regretted that you watched the presidential debate last night. Or like me, you may have regretted that you spent like an hour and a half reading analyses afterwards, right? I wish I got a little more sleep. But so regret for our actions are short-lived. Those tend to pass, the research suggests, in about 3 weeks. So asking someone out, speaking up in class, if someone says something that really offends you, speaking up and pointing out like, hey, you know, I don't know how you meant that, but I really appreciate it if you could speak a bit differently. That's a bit alienating to people. That can be hard to do in the moment. You feel like you're going to regret it. That will pass, right? So our actions, regrets for those are short-lived. What do we regret for a long time? The things we don't do. In our inactions. Those are the things that when they do research with people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they're asking them to look back on what do you regret, it's rarely the bad, it's not even the bad decisions. When people decide to act and do something, you can work that into your narrative, right? Even if you chose the wrong person to marry, most people who get divorced still don't regret that decision to get married. They'll often say, well, you know, it was the right decision for the time, or I'm glad that I have kids, or it made me the person that I am today. So we can work a bad action into our narrative, but something that we never did that we really wanted to do, that doesn't go away. That stays with us. So my suggestion here, if you really want to do something, take that action. If you really want to move to Paris, make it happen. If you really want to go to grad school or take a year off, whatever it might be, do that thing, because that can be hard to explain away. That will stay with you. Obviously, you can't do everything you want to do, but if you keep coming back to that thing, pursue it. Strategy number 4. I just want to work this image into every talk. I'll be honest. I love this little baby. All right, there's fabulous research from Alison Wood Brooks. She's at Harvard University. There's other researchers, but Alison Wood Brooks is one of the best on this. There's research showing when you have a big decision to make, it can often be anxiety-provoking for both men and women. It can feel like this is so important. What I decide here is so important, and it can make you anxious about that choice. Alison Wood Brooks and others have found, reframe that feeling. It actually doesn't help to say, don't worry, it's not a big deal. That actually does not help. It does not help to tell yourself, calm down, it's okay. That doesn't work, because your body is telling you you're anxious about it. It's keeping you up at night. So to tell yourself it's not to worry doesn't work. What does work is to reframe the worry, because your body's feeling of anxiety actually feels very much like excitement. You know what it's like the night before something you're looking forward to, you can't sleep? You know what it's like when you're worried about something and you can't sleep? Very similar physiological reaction. So reframe it. Tell yourself one of two things. You can say, I'm excited about making this decision. I'm excited about making this decision. This decision matters to me. I'm excited about it. That will help, because people, what Alison Wood Brooks and others have found, you actually think more clearly. The feeling doesn't go away, but you can actually solve problems more effectively if you're telling yourself you're excited. I know, it seems like magic, right? But how could this work? But you're reinterpreting, and your body can respond better. Instead of going into panic mode, you get into problem-solving mode. Another one that works for me, instead of I'm excited, is to tell myself, this is how my body prepares itself for something that really matters to me. This is how my body prepares for something that really matters to me. So just reframe the anxiety. It really helps. You think better. So now I want to pass the baton. We're also going to do questions in a minute. But I want to pass the baton. I am working to talk with people around the country about gender and decision making. But I hope you'll also take this message forward. We need to make it the case that when a woman gets up to speak, that people take her seriously as a leader. They don't just think of her as compassionate, as a team player, right? We also want them to think of her as a real risk taker, as someone who's decisive, as someone who is going to be a good leader. We need to do it for women who are already adults and who are trying to lead, and we need to do it for girls who want to be leaders. We need to do it for them, and we need to do it for her. Thank you.